All right, hey guys, welcome back. Thanks so much for being here today. It's December the 1st, Tuesday, and we're set to go in about 3 minutes with our lecture tonight. So hope you guys had a great holiday and nice Thanksgiving. Um, and yeah, let's just get back into it. I'll just give you a few minutes to get comfortable. But it's always good to see you guys. Feel free to say hi. Hi there, Gary. Hi, Rachel. Good to see you guys. Hope you had a nice break. Hey, Andrea. Hello, hello, everyone. My break was good. I mean, I'm doing a lot of grading to catch up on some of that. I had a little small gathering, but not traveling anywhere, just with the relatives that I know that are close by, and it was like just 3 or 4 of us. So it's small and distanced. So I try to be responsible, but still have some semblance of the holiday. I'm sure next year we'll be able to return to our more conventional big gatherings. Hey, Gabriel, how's it going? And Danny. But yeah, it was a nice break. It always seems like it's a little too short. I don't know. What do you think is better? Do you like the Thanksgiving break or the spring break better? It's kind of different because, the spring break, it's more in the middle of a semester. So it's like you get done and you still have like maybe 4 or 5 weeks of class. Thanksgiving break, you only have a couple weeks after that. So it's kind of weird, you take a break, you're back, and you're just there for a few weeks. But I don't know. Either way, it's nice to have the time back. Hey there, Haley. Good to see you too. Hey, Cameron. Okay. Just another half minute or so. Okay, everybody. Well, it's mostly 5:30 right now, so welcome back. Let's get started. Thanks again so much for being here and attending and making the class what it is. Appreciate your hard work and focus throughout the semester, especially you guys that are here watching live. So appreciate it. Let's just say what we're doing now and for the next couple of meetings. For some of our nice discussions and for the sake of one class meeting that we skipped for election day, the syllabus and some of the dates got pushed back just slightly. So today is the day that I'm actually going to finish the last lecture on philosophy of mind subject. And then there's just going to be 2 more lectures that follow this before we have a review session. So you're going to have a lecture Thursday on the meaning of life and what makes a life go well. That's our final topic of the semester, life and death. So I'll try to get into that with you guys on Thursday and then a little bit also on Tuesday. And wherever we finish at that point, we'll be done with all the lecture material. I'll give you guys your study guide, and then you can use that to start preparing for the final exam in the same way that I provided a study guide for the midterm. I'll give you a new study guide for the final, which has an expanded list of questions and topics, and we'll have a review session next Thursday. That's what the class meeting next Thursday is all about, just going over the big study guide that I'll send off to you guys later this week. Is the final on the 17th? Let me look up the syllabus. I have it here in my desktop. Yes, it is. It is the 17th, Thursday the 17th, from 5 to 6:50 p.m. That's the official time slot. So just know that. And hey, AJ, good to see you. In the last essay, when you quote from a lecture, do I just put your last name? Yeah, so it's always, I think, best to quote from the book, or if you're going to cite me, you don't need to refer to a direct verbatim quote, but you could put like Vulich lecture and then give the date that I spoke about the topic. I kind of prefer direct quotes to be taken from the book itself because I'm directing you towards the information in the book. But yeah, if you wanted to, just you could put the date and my last name. And here you're saying, AJ, if you want to send your essay to check before due date, okay, good question, thank you. I'm happy to look at drafts. When students send me those drafts, I always try to give good comments back within a reasonable time frame. So since the essay's due next Tuesday, anybody who would like for me to see a draft and make any kind of comments or revisions to your draft, I would just request that you get it to me before the end of the weekend, because if it comes to me, let's say Sunday night or Monday morning, that's getting kind of close to the due date, and I do have a lot of teaching duties on Monday that make it hard for me to respond to a bunch of late incoming emails. But anything that I receive all the way up through Friday this week, for sure you get a response no later than the end of the weekend, so you can make some changes if needed. So definitely, yeah, I welcome people to share their draft if they would like, to have my eyes pass over it before you give me your official submission. That's always fair. Andrea, so the second essay that's due on the 8th is due in class, like we submitted. Oh yeah, so for your submission of the essay, you can turn it in before the official due date or time, but just I don't want it later than 5:30. So it doesn't mean that it has to be exactly at 5:30 on the 8th, but any time leading up to that. So in the earlier afternoon or day or in the minutes leading up to class time, that's fine. Could we just quote from the lecture notes? Well, I mean, you have your lecture notes, but those are not quotes, right? You're writing the notes, so the notes reflect your understanding of what I say, unless you're literally just, like every word that comes out of my mouth, you have it exactly quoted. So what I'm saying in the lectures is not really the stuff that you need to quote. For real quotes, which I advise you to include in your paper, here's the rule. Just take the quoted passage, place it in quotation marks when you're putting it in your essay, and then just at the end, place the page number inside a set of parentheses. So it would be like, Descartes says, and then, quote, Descartes speaking, end quote, and then parentheses and a number, which the number just says like 555 or something, page 555, if that's where you found the quote from. I just want to know where the page number is that you use the quote from, if you use any textbook quotes. And once again, it's always a good idea, I think, to sprinkle in a couple of them as support for your essay, and just, of course, to prove to the professor that you're even reading the book. Even I know I give you clear and detailed lectures, but I do enforce that I want you to use the book. Okay, Rachel, submit by email. Yes, submit it by email to me. So Andrea, it could be like, yeah, P55, that'd be perfect. That's probably my favorite way, just P dot and then 55, but I'm not gonna deduct credit if people just write 55 or PG dot 555, so that's not like a hard rule, but I just want to know the page number in a parentheses somehow. Okay, and yeah, so submissions come to me by email. Just create an email, send it to me, rvulich@fullerton.edu, and make sure that you spell the name correctly in the email address. But for each received submission that I get, I will hit a reply. So I will give you a reply in a pretty short time frame after you give it to me. So that's how you know that I got it, that I confirmed it with you. So make sure to check for a reply. If you didn't get one, then you might want to double check to make sure that there was no issue with the delivery of the document. Sadly, now that we're fully online for the time being anyway, there have been a couple cases, not in this class actually, but in some other classes, there have been some cases of a student or students who had intended to submit things but failed to properly send them, and then they only notice the failure to deliver weeks and weeks later, at which point I've already talked to the class about, in that other case, the answers for the homework and stuff. So that makes it hard for me to restore credit. Anyway, the main thing I'm just saying is make sure you send it properly and just do it as an email attachment. And there won't be any confusion or doubt about it because I'll give you confirmation email when I get it from you. Okay. So yes, if any person wants to write on the topic about the philosophy of mind, then this is one more lecture that can be used because in addition to Descartes and Daniel Stoljar, which we've already talked about, there's also these other two authors that we're now going to try and review today, and that's J.J.C. Smart and Alan Turing. So I'm going to start with J.J.C. Smart's article for the beginning of today's meeting. Okay. So yeah, J.J.C. Smart. So this was a Scottish-born philosopher who lived a lot of his life in Australia and was a professor there. He lived from 1920 to 2012. And in 1959, he wrote this piece that we're going to look at today, which is just called Sensations and Brain Processes. Sensations and Brain Processes, J.J.C. Smart, 1959. The world of philosophy is kind of a small world in a way. Just a fun fact is that there's some indirect connection that I have to J.J.C. Smart. Basically, I published a book as one of the co-editors and authors a couple years ago with another philosophy colleague, but the woman who's my colleague, she's much older than me. She's like in her 70s. Anyway, when she was in grad school and when she was young, one of her dissertation advisors was J.J.C. Smart. So it's like he was her teacher. I did a book with her. So I don't know, you're learning something from somebody who's at least distantly connected to this person, but it's just something to mention. Okay, but anyway, yeah, J.J.C. Smart, Sensations and Brain Processes. Let's remind ourselves what this whole concept or topic is right now. We're dealing with philosophy of mind, which asks questions about consciousness and the nature of it. Is it physical? Is it just the brain? Is it just the physical brain with neurons and synapses firing that's the whole thing responsible for consciousness? Or is it something that is not physical? Is it something more supernatural, like there's a soul or a spirit, as a philosopher might say, a mind? Okay, now there are different views on this question. Some people hold the view of monism. That means that the universe and everything in it is just made out of one kind of substance. On the other side, there's dualism, which says, no, there's two substances that make everything up. Now, what are these possible substances? Okay, well, one of them is known as physical matter. And that's anything that's extended in space that just takes up some room or takes up some space, even if it's a very small amount of it. And the most minimal unit of physical matter is the atom. The other kind of substance is mind. And mind is something that does not have extension in space. So it's got no size, shape, volume. It's got literally no parts in space. So it's immaterial. It's not physical, but it's something that's thinking anyway, something that's conscious. It's like a pure consciousness, but not attached to any physical form. So if you're a dualist, you think there's both of those. There's physical matter that builds up, all the objects that we see in space, including our own bodies. But then there's also the mind. And according to dualism, the mind is not made out of matter, and it's something that's separate from matter. Okay, and then with monism, there's two types. There's physicalism, which says that everything's made out of matter, even the mind, even just consciousness is made out of matter. And then there's idealism, which we just briefly mentioned, but that's the view that there is no matter and everything's made out of thoughts and ideas. So our main debate here is between physicalists and dualists. We started to present the idea of dualism through Descartes' philosophy and writing. He had his long argument for dualism, basically that since you can imagine your mind and body existing separately, they must be able to exist separately because that's clear and distinct, and God is real, and God wouldn't allow you to have a clear and distinct perception that's actually false, so you can just trust and believe then that since it's conceivable for the mind and body to exist separately, as seen in the method of doubt and know those things, then they really are two separate beings. And then we looked at Daniel Stoljar and the whole discussion of physicalism and his presentation of the idea of supervenience. So Stoljar said physicalism means everything's physical. Well, two questions could be asked. What does that mean, first of all, the interpretation question? Secondly, is that even true? And that's the truth question. He says the supervenience idea is how you break down and answer that interpretation question. What it means for everything to be physical is for everything to supervene on the position of atoms. In other words, take a dot matrix picture. It's a big picture made out of little dots. If you had two identical dot matrices with the same placement of dots, then they would have the same global features, meaning the larger scale features would all be the same if the dots were held fixed and they were the same arrangement. Side by side with that, if this universe is made out of matter and it's just a bunch of atoms grouped into various aggregations of objects, then the position of supervenience says that if there were a second universe which were atomically identical, like a replica of ours, then it would contain all the same facts, including the same psychological phenomena like thoughts and feelings. So that's supervenience. And then the end of the lecture last time, we talked about the two arguments that Stoljar presents for physicalism. One, the argument from causal closure, and then the other one, the argument from methodological naturalism. Okay, so that's just bringing us back up to speed. So now we're on to J.J.C. Smart. And now, since we're all kind of back on this topic, I'll tell you, he's a physicalist. So he's another physicalist, and he's also going to try and make the case that physicalism is true. Now, let's get clear on the way he's using these words in the title, sensations and brain processes. His thesis in this article is, in a way, deceptively simple. He's just saying, my position is that sensations equals brain processes, okay? Like, so this is his main claim that he's trying to just justify and defend. Sensations equal brain processes. Okay, and so that's what he's trying to persuade the reader, that sensations are simply just brain processes. Now, what's this word sensation mean? Okay. A sensation in his usage is just any state of consciousness whatsoever. So any state of consciousness. Okay, so this is a very, very broad category. Any state of consciousness. So let me give you some random examples. The sensation, the conscious state of pain, right? Like you hit your knee on something, ouch, that hurts. That sensation is one possible sensation. Or pleasure. You know, you're eating ice cream, it's like your favorite flavor, you're like, this is so good, I love this pint of ice cream. That's a sensation, and that's another possibility. The sensation of listening to a lecture, like you're having that sensation right now. The sensation of dreaming, or of riding a bike, or of playing an instrument, or of singing, or of watching television, you know, giving a lecture, that's my current sensation. So these are all states of consciousness. There's indefinitely many examples that I could give you. Okay? Eating what? Oh yeah, eating. Okay, good. I thought you said eaten and then NGL, like not gonna lie. I'm like, wow, how do I parse that? Anyways, got you. Yeah, not to worry, AJ. So sensations, it could cover a wide variety. Eating, dreaming, running around, doing a physical activity, playing music, listening to music, watching a movie. Any state of consciousness that your mind could be in, we're just calling that with the label sensations, okay? Now here's, returning to his claim, this is what it means. Sensations, he's saying, are just brain processes. So what is it to feel the pain or the pleasure or the taste of the ice cream or whatever? What is it to listen to the music and or to have a dream or whatever the case is? Whatever those sensations are, he's saying those are just brain processes. So in other words, when you feel pain or anything else, that is simply just a particular state of your brain at that current time. Like it's a particular configuration of the neurons, synapses, and parts of the brain, and that is what we feel or experience as the sensation of blank, you know, any of those examples that I just mentioned. So his claim is that sensations are just brain processes. If that is true, then physicalism is true, because physicalism says that everything in this universe is just physical. And people really don't disagree with that except for consciousness, right? The only area where someone's going to say maybe that's not physical is when it comes to our own ability to have a subjective experience, to perceive, to think, to feel, to have all that mental activity. So people say maybe that's something not physical. Well, if that is just brain processes, if even your mental life and all the experiences and sensations you have are just physical states of the brain, then that leaves no room for anything that is not physical. So yeah, he's setting out to give a good case that sensations are just brain processes. Now, one of the reasons that he's so committed to this viewpoint is that he says if sensations weren't brain processes, like suppose that dualism is true, and it's not really just a brain process, but it's something more supernatural, like your soul or something is going through some of those experiences, and it's not necessarily just the brain. Well, he says, if your sensations were not just physical facts, if they were some mysterious, non-physical basis, like the dualist claims, then they would be weird mysteries to science. And if there's something that's not explained by science, the term that is used for that, and he refers to this, is nomological dangler. Okay, so more of the language and terms from this paper. Let's go over this term. Nomological dangler. Okay, so nomological dangler is just a fancy sounding word for something that is that remains that is not understood by science. So something that remains unexplained by the physical sciences. So again, his claim is that consciousness and thought and all those sensations that we have, they're just brain processes. So in the end, they actually are just physical phenomena. They're the workings of the physical brain that's up there in your head. But if they weren't, and if dualism instead was true, then the sensations that we are experiencing would be these nomological danglers. Nomological danglers, something that remains unexplained, that is like a mystery that science cannot comprehend. That's what a nomological dangler is. This derives from the Greek root. Nomos, from Greek, has to do with pertaining to law. So nomological means of or pertaining to law. A nomological dangler is kind of an invented term, but it means something that is dangling outside of our sphere of like scientific understanding. So, I mean, I don't know if a visual metaphor helps you, but imagine that all of our scientific concepts and knowledge are like in a self-contained sphere of knowledge. Then a nomological dangler would be something outside that sphere that we don't yet even know how it works. So it's like a random thing that's not operating according to the other physical laws and understandings that we currently have. Now, here's a question for you. Do you think that a scientist likes these nomological danglers or no? Does a scientist want for there to be nomological danglers or not want that? What do you think? I'm talking about a scientist's point of view. Is this something that scientists prefer or don't? The idea of a so-called nomological dangler. What do you think on that, if you had to guess or just even judge? AJ, you say yes because it makes them want to know more. No, not really, actually, though. So I understand maybe why you're thinking so, but these other responses are a little more accurate to the case. No, the scientist doesn't want there to be a nomological dangler. I mean, if there are, they want to explain them, yes. But science, in the end, wants to be able to explain not just some stuff, but all the things in reality. Right? So science doesn't just set limits, like let's just understand how physical facts operate outside of us. Let's know how planets orbit, why volcanoes erupt, why the weather is the way it is. Let's understand photosynthesis. But hey, consciousness and sensation, just don't even touch that. That's never going to be understood. See, the scientist doesn't want to like provide or think that there's any limitation to how far we can push our scientific understanding. So it'd be something that would be like a failure of explanation for science. A nomological dangler would be a scientist saying, I can't understand this. And that is the whole business of science, is to provide rational and empirically based explanation for phenomena that we see. So anyway, since nomological danglers are kind of like the boogeyman of science and is not preferred, his main goal is to try and show you that sensations and consciousness, they're not nomological danglers. They're just more brain processes. And that's something that can be understood physically through neuroscience and chemistry and such fields as that. Okay, so he believes that there's really no very good reason to be a dualist. His strategy now is going to be this. He says to the reader, that's us, let me take the best shot that the dualist has, basically. He says, let me consider what are objections that a dualist might state against my view that sensations are just physical brain processes. And what he's going to then do is try and rebut these objections. Okay, so it's like he presents the viewpoint of the dualist critic, and then he says, but here's what that argument has wrong. Here's the problem with that argument. Okay, so he thinks this, that if he can basically debunk the best dualist objections to physicalism, then that means that he's dismissed the best arguments that dualists have to offer, and that leaves you with no real logical alternative. You should just prefer physicalism if we can, reject and refute the most powerful criticisms that a dualist would make against physicalism. Okay, so one more time, I'm going to write his thesis at the top of the board so that just stays in your mind. This is the position that he's showing objections to. The position, again, is that sensations just are equal to brain processes. Okay, now, one more thing about that claim. It's a strict claim of identity. It's not like he's saying these are two things that are related to each other very closely. It's one and the same thing, but with two different labels. So it's like if I told you, I'm Dr. Vulich and I'm a professor and I'm a runner. That's not two different people. That's just two descriptions in language of me, the same one object. So sensations are brain processes. It's not like there's a sensation and there's a brain process and they connect or they're related. It's one and the same, okay? So like if he gives this example, if a burglar leaves a footprint, you say that that footprint is a sign that there was a trespasser, but the footprint is not the trespasser himself. They're two different things, right? That's not like this. This is the same thing, but just being referred to as a physical description versus the experienced element of your sensation. Okay, so sensations are brain processes. Okay, so what are the objections then that he thinks dualists will provide to that assertion, to that claim? Try not to lose the plot here, right? Who's a physicalist? J.J.C. Smart is a physicalist. So now as he presents these objections, these are objections that come from like his imagined critic. He says, here's what the critic will probably push back against in terms of saying this is false. And then he'll be the one to try and show that those objections fail. Now, in the book, in the essay, he states 8 different objections. In my mind, they were not all as important. Some were more important than others in the understanding of the reading. So I'm just going to try and talk about some of the big, more important ones and leave some of the others aside. The ones that are most important we'll cover. So objection 1 to this point. Objection 1. This first objection that we're going to discuss is like the main one, the most important one. So once we understand that, then we'll be pretty good in terms of the whole essay. So the first objection to this claim, that sensations are just nothing more than brain processes, is that any average person, like me or you, can easily talk about our sensations. Like we do that all the time. That's like half of what we were ever talking about. Like, oh, I watched a movie, it was so awesome, or it was so funny, or so boring. Or you could say, I went for a run and I got so tired, I needed to take a nap after that. Like, so we talk about our sensations, the things that we experience all the time, every day. And that's easy. So an average person can easily talk about their sensations, but, now here's the criticism, but that same average person can't tell you anything at all about what's going on in their brain. And so the critic here says, that must mean they are not the same thing. If they were the same thing, then we should be able to just switch between talking about what's going on in our brain versus what we feel as a sensation. But it seems like we can only really talk about our sensations, and we don't even have any understanding, basically, of what's happening in the actual brain. Like, tell me right now, the sensation of watching a lecture, what brain process are you going through? You don't really know. You can say you think this lecture is boring. You can say you think it's stimulating or funny or anything else, but you're not going to be able to tell me, oh, by the way, here's exactly what I mean. When I say it was funny, I mean that there was like neural activity over here in the left parietal cortex and the synapses that started to fire over here in the other part of the prefrontal lobe. That was how it felt when I watched the lecture. See, you can't convert your experience talk into like detailed brain process talk. So here I'll write the objection finally after explaining it. It's the idea that, an average person can easily talk about their sensations but cannot say or cannot talk about what is going on in their brain. So the two things must not be the same. Okay, so that's the objection, just to sort of summarize it in writing. And so yeah, just last word on that. The point that the critic is making is, how can you say sensations are brain processes? I don't see how you can say that, because talk to anybody and they'll tell you about their sensations, no problem. But if you switch it up and say, okay, well, the sensation is really a brain process. So what is the brain process? You just shrug your shoulders like, I don't really know. I just experienced the sensation part. So how could they be the same if we could talk about one but not the other? Okay, well, are you ready for it now? We're going to hear JJC Smart's comeback against this. Okay, so here's his reply to the objection. Okay, so what he says is this. It's possible for a single object to have two different descriptions. And a person can not be aware that these two different descriptions refer to the same object, even though they do. Okay, so it's no bar, it's no obstacle to referring to something that you only know of it through one of its descriptions or senses. So, let me think how I want to put that. Okay, so just because there are two descriptions or labels for something does not necessarily mean that it is two different things. So let me say this to you, because I know it's a little cramped here, but what it says is, just because there are two different descriptions or labels for something does not necessarily mean that it has to be two different things. Okay, and there's an example given to illustrate this point. Okay, and so let me just draw a little arrow here so that I can put that on the board. The example given is of the morning star and the evening star. Let me explain that. Okay. So anyway, let me make sure this is very clear. Objection. Somebody says, no, sensations can't be brain processes. I'm telling you, JJC Smart, I disagree, because think about it. An average person, like anybody, can talk about their sensations but can't say much about the brain, so how could they be the same? Here's his comeback. Wait a minute, though. Just because there are two different descriptions or labels in language for something, that does not necessarily imply that they have to be two different things. In other words, there can be one object with two different linguistic descriptions, and that does not mean that it's two objects, just because there's two labels or descriptions of it. The example he gives to make the point is the morning star and the evening star. Okay, so let me explain that. So this is a true story. If you go back in time a ways, back when there wasn't like a lot of electricity and stuff, so there was not as much light pollution, you could see all the stars in the night sky, even if you're in a major metropolitan city. I'm talking about like back in the 1800s and stuff, right? So for a long time, people would look up in the night sky and they would see this big, bright star, the brightest star shining in the evening. And so they had a word for that. They termed it the evening star. So you follow me? The evening star is what? It's the brightest star visible in the night sky. Okay? Now, in that same time period, if you would wake up early enough in the morning, like at dawn, because there's still low light, there would still be some stars visible in the morning sky too. And the brightest stars that you could see in the morning sky, they gave a label for that, and that was the morning star. So evening star, brightest star in the evening sky. Morning star, brightest star in the morning sky. Tell me though, something was discovered as people developed more powerful telescopes and other tools of observation. A kind of scientific discovery was made about this. What do you think that was, if you were to guess? They found out, they discovered that actually, what? Concerning the morning/evening star, what did they find out? Ah, yes, that they are the same star. That's correct, Andrea. So they were able to determine that, wait a minute, that's not actually two different objects. It's just the same object, but we've had two labels for it. Now, just because we have those two labels, here's the point, right? can you understand that that does not mean that there have to be two different objects? Because language, we could invent as many different descriptions or labels for the same object as we wanted, but that doesn't multiply it into being more than one thing. And so he's saying that's also true here of sensations and brain processes. We don't talk about them the same way. We don't describe them the same way. But according to a physicalist, they are the same thing, and they're just equivalent. Whether you call it a brain process or a sensation, you're referring to one and the same physical phenomenon, and they're not separate and they're not different. So sensations, just he thinks, are brain processes. Don't be misled by the fact that language, when we speak of sensations, bears no resemblance to talk of processes within the physical brain, because they're just one and the same thing, just like the morning star and the evening star are the same, despite the appearance created by language that they were two different things. He gives some funny, interesting examples. Like, suppose that there was a person who stays up late every night. So the real night owl, you know, they sleep through the day like a vampire and they're up all night. Then you've got another friend of this person who's the early bird, the early morning person. So they're up bright and early every day and they go to sleep way before it gets dark. So this person's up in the day, always asleep at night. The other person, always up at night, sleeps through the day. Imagine this conversation. Morning guy talking to evening guy, I don't know, during the 1 or 2 hours that they're both awake. He's like, hey, what's up? Evening man, I need to tell you something. You need to get up earlier one of these days, because I see you sleeping all through the morning, but you know, you're actually missing out on some beautiful celestial objects up in the sky. Have you heard of the morning star? Evening guy's like, what? No, I've not heard of that. You know, I'm the evening guy and I don't get up. What is it? He says, okay, well, let me just describe it. It's the most beautiful bright star in the morning sky. You should get up one of these days and you'll see it too. And the evening guy says, well, hold on, morning man. I mean, it sounds great. I don't know, but why don't you ever stay up one of these nights? I mean, would it kill you to just stay up and watch the night sky? Because if you did, you'd see something amazing. Have you ever heard of the evening star? The guy's like, no, I've not heard of that. What is it? You know, I'm not going to stay up to see it. Maybe you could tell me. He says, okay, well, I'll tell you. It's the biggest, brightest, beautiful star in the evening sky. What do you think about that? He says, okay, maybe someday I'll see it. Now, it looks like these two people are talking about different objects, right? Talking past each other about evening versus morning star. But we all know that despite these different descriptions and labels, it's the same object. In fact, you want to get into a little more detail, they found out that it wasn't even a star. It was the planet Venus, which sort of looks like a star from viewing conditions on planet Earth. And they mistakenly did believe that it was two separate stars when in fact it was one and the same object and not even a star. Okay, so therefore he uses that as his rejection of this criticism. Don't tell me that just because we can talk about the sensations but not the brain process, that must be that they're two different things. Two different labels or descriptions for one object can easily exist. If I show up to a party in a costume, I talk to someone, tell them my name's Frank, come back later with no costume on, and I tell them my name is Richard, that person might say, oh, I met two awesome people, very different at the party. Frank versus Richard, you know, hang out with both of them one day. But it's just me, you know, in two different presentations. So we can't just use language as our guide to how many objects there are necessarily. Okay. And then in the discussion in the book, he says it this way. So in stating the objection, he says it like this, kind of colorful language he's using, but he says, any illiterate peasant can talk perfectly well about his sensations or how things look or feel or about his aches and pains, but he may know nothing whatsoever about neurophysiology. So the things we are talking about when we describe our sensations can't be brain processes. But now he replies. He says, well, you might as well say a nation of lazy people that never saw the morning star or knew of its existence, but who used the expression evening star, could not refer to the same entity with the word morning star. He also gives a case of lightning and electricity. He says, so lightning just is an electrical discharge of ions in the Earth's atmosphere. To say lightning and electricity is to describe the same thing in two different ways. But he says, modern physical science tells us that lightning is a certain kind of electrical discharge. This, it is now believed, is what the true nature of lightning is. It is not that there are two things, a flash of lightning and an electrical discharge. There is just one thing, a flash of lightning, which we can describe scientifically as an electrical discharge. So it's not like two separate things are referred to by that different looking linguistic description. Okay, so this objection one and reply, that's like the core objection and reply of the essay. So if that is clearly set down in your mind right now, then that's good, because this is really the core concept of his paper that I wanted to get through to you. And it kind of like continues to refer back to similar objections and replies to this one. So some of the others I believe are a little repetitive, But even though they are, let me talk about some of them, okay? So another one mentioned after this, objection 2, takes a similar theme. And it's just that, objection 2, the words sensation and brain process have different meanings. So they can't be the same thing. And his reply to that is much like the initial reply. In a way, it's a bit more of the same. He says, well, the words differ in meaning. Just like the word lightning has a different use and a different meaning than electricity does, but that does not mean that they can't be the same thing. Two words can have different meanings, but still refer to the same object. Okay, and like again, let's think of the example of the morning and evening star. What's definition of evening star? Well, it means brightest star in the evening sky. That's not the same definition as morning star, because morning star definition is brightest star in the morning sky. But just because we have these two different non-identical definitions, language cannot cause the one star to be more than one thing just by describing it in two different non-equivalent ways. So once again, it seems like he's pointing out that we are overly reliant sometimes on language to guide our intuitions about how many things exist, as if the invention of a new description or label automatically must imply that there's more than one thing when it's described in multiple ways. But that's just not necessarily true, and so his second reply says that. Okay, so I just want to go over a couple more. So let me think of the two most important ones that I'd like to continue to mention. Okay, so yeah, here's another one. Let's go to objection 4, skipping around a bit to just cover the most basic essential items. Objection 4 is this one. So sensations. You could argue that a sensation has no physical location in space. But a brain process, of course, does have a physical location. Where is the physical location of your brain processes? Well, there's only one possibility. It's physically located where the brain is, inside your skull, right there in your head. So, but a sensation, you can say, the mental experience of the sensation doesn't appear to have any physical position, so how could they be the same? That's another objection. So sensations have no physical location, but brain processes do, so they must not be the same. Okay, and again, Smart is ready with a reply to that. In stating this reply, he gives this example. I'll use his example, and I'll also try to modify it and give a slightly different one. But okay, there's a visual phenomena that happens with your eyes when you look at a light source for a moment. Okay, now I know all of us have experienced this, and you can even do it just if you have a handy light source in your body, hopefully when it's not too bright, because I don't want you to hurt your eyes. But for example, there's a chandelier right here above me. And if I look at that chandelier, one of the light bulbs that are shining on it, if I do look at it for a minute and then close my eyes, there is a faint after image in the outline of the light source that remains imprinted on my field of vision. Do you know what I'm speaking about? Like, so if you look at, let's say, like a fluorescent light bar, you stare at it for a minute, close your eyes, you're going to see like the remaining like visual outline of the light source in your closed field of vision, and it sort of shows up like as an orangey purple or whatever residue from the visual impression. Do you know? Can anybody confirm that you know what I'm speaking about? Like if you've ever accidentally looked at the sun for a moment, this is another very obvious case, but it can also be induced with a weaker light source. Okay, good. Yeah, so he refers to that example as an after image. Okay, now question. If one of these after images is generated by means of looking at light and then closing your eyes, where will I find the after image? Where is it physically at? Is the after image in space outside of me? No. It's not like someone will walk around in my room here and find that floating after image. Well, where is it then? Is it inside of me? Well, also, you're not going to find it there. If you open up my body and you like dissect me, you're just going to see a bunch of blood and tissue, muscles and bones, but you're not going to see the after image. So it looks like there's really like sort of nowhere that the after image can be positioned. But the brains, of course, that we have are definitely located in the skull. So that might seem to be a mismatch, which shows that they're not identical, they're not equal. The sensation doesn't seem to be anywhere, but the brain process is certainly right there, so that must not be the same thing. Another example, his after image example works, but it is a little weird. So, I mean, think of like right now a memory. I want you to imagine like, I don't know, like a memory of your last birthday and whatever you're doing at that time. Now the memory's in your head, but where will I see the memory? It's not like projected outside of you like a movie showing on a screen. And it's also not that I would find it physically within you if I were to like look. So it seems like there's no location of the sensations, but the brain processes have one, so must not be the same. Once again, though, he gives a pretty basic response. His reply is, it's only language that causes us to think of these sensations and brain processes differently. And in fact, the sensation is just a brain process, so it does have a physical location, and it's located in the brain. The only reason that we never talk about that is because it would sort of not really suit the purposes of an ordinary conversation to mention it. Like for you to say, hey, I have a really strong memory of my crazy birthday party last year. Oh, and by the way, it's physically here. It's like right there in the brain. I mean, if you started expanding on it and saying that, I mean, a person might say, well, I guess that's literally true in a sense, but it's a weird thing to mention because who asked you where the physical location is? What purpose could that serve to mention? So once again, though, even if it's an odd or unconventional thing to say, his point is that it's not literally false. The sensation is a brain process, and if you think about it, it actually does have a physical location. So he just basically denies the claim that there's this difference, that there is a physical location to the sensations, actually, being as they are identical to what the brain process is. Okay, now, I told you I didn't want to go over every objection in his essay, and so I'm going to basically cut it short by just talking about one more that I thought was another important one. So I'm going to zoom on to objection 7 then. So we talked about 1 and 2 and 4, and then now 7. Okay, so the 7th objection that he goes over, we can think of this as like Descartes' objection. This is like the Cartesian dualist's objection. Because what this says is, I can imagine myself having sensations even if I had no body at all. Like I can imagine myself dying and then just being like a soul or a ghost and still having thoughts and experience, but now I'm not even in a body. You know, I can imagine myself being turned into a statue and sitting there and thinking, even though I've got no brain at all. So that's another objection. Some person like Descartes said that. Descartes said, well, we can clearly conceive of the mind and the body existing separately. And just being able to clearly imagine that possibility is enough to show that they really are different. So that's another objection. Let me put it here. Again, the point is that I can imagine myself having sensations even if I had no body or brain. So sensations must not be brain processes. Okay. So one more response then coming back from JJC Smart to that objection. Everyone clear on the objection itself, what it's saying? It says, no, sensations cannot be brain processes. That can't be, because I could like right now imagine a situation where I still have sensations even if I don't have a brain or a body anymore. And since I can clearly imagine that, that just shows that they can't be the same thing. Well, his response to this is, look, a person can also imagine, you can imagine that lightning is not electricity. You can imagine that the morning star is not the evening star. In fact, not even just imagination, people thought that it wasn't the same thing for real. Like people for a long time, until we discovered they were the same object, they didn't just imagine, they really did believe that they were two separate things. But once again, the point is that even though we can imagine that the morning star is not the evening star, it still is. We can imagine that lightning is not electricity. Imagine a person that doesn't even understand what electricity is, but they can look at the pretty lightning. The fact that you can imagine them to be two separate things doesn't mean that they actually are. So that's one of the points of reply here. I can also imagine that the morning star is not the evening star, but it is. The last word he gives here is this. He says that the person who states this objection, they hold what he calls like a ghost theory of consciousness. Okay, so like if you believe that consciousness can exist without a body at all, then that means you must believe that your consciousness could persist on as like a ghost, like in a sort of ghostly, non-material form. Well, his last word is this. That we could argue is a theory of consciousness, and he says, call that the ghost theory. He says, in a way, I can't falsify that theory. I can't like definitively prove to you it's not true. But if it's a theory, it has to be, he says, compared to other theories that are alternatives to it. And the strong alternative to the ghost theory of consciousness, he says, is the brain theory of consciousness. And so he says to the reader, look, you could take your pick. Do you want to go with the ghost theory of consciousness or the brain theory? He says the brain theory seems much more plausible and it has more empirical evidence behind it. So he says, in a way, I just give you your choice. But if it was me, I would think, this is JJC Smart speaking, JJC Smart says to his intuition, the brain theory is just eminently more reasonable and plausible than the ghost theory is. So that's the last point. The objection presents a ghost theory of consciousness. But, and this is his reply to that, but the brain theory is more plausible. Okay, so you see it there, the whole reply. I can also imagine that, the morning star is not the evening star, like this is claiming. I can imagine the brain's not the sensation, but that they are the same thing. So the same point could hold here. In other words, the ability to imagine that two words refer to two different things does not always establish with total certainty that they are two different things. And then last, the objection given presents a ghost theory of consciousness, but compared against it, the brain theory is more reasonable. Okay, so I'll read a little from the book here, and you'll hear him say this. He says, so first of all, stating the objection, he states it as follows. I can imagine myself even turned to stone and still having aches, pains, mental images, and so on. And then his reply, well, I can imagine that electricity is not lightning. I can imagine that lightning is a purely optical phenomenon. I can imagine that lightning is not an electrical discharge. I can imagine that the evening star is not the morning star, but it is. All the objection is showing is that experience and brain process don't have the same meaning linguistically, but it does not show that they are not in fact the same. And then he goes down a bit further. He says, I suspect that the objection is thinking of experience as a kind of ghostly entity. So On their view, it is composed of ghost stuff. On my view, consciousness is composed of brain stuff. He goes down further. He says, the dualist holds that experiences are something other than material processes, so they are a sort of ghost stuff. I say this is something that can make sense, but I think that experiences are not ghost stuff, but rather brain stuff. This is another hypothesis, and in my view, even more plausible, and the argument given cannot knock it down. So that's basically the full story here of J.J.C. Smart's defense of physicalism. So just to summarize it one last time. He starts off by saying sensations are just brain processes. In other words, they're just physical things. He's saying if they were not, and dualism instead was true, then they would be nomological danglers, things that mysteriously cannot be or are not explained by science. And science doesn't want to concede that there are such things that are inexplicable to the physical sciences. So he claims that they're not. They are just physical things, they're brain processes. So after this, he sets forth to rebut objections to that claim. One objection was, how could they be the same thing if I could talk about my sensations all day, but I can't say really much at all about my brain? Well, just because one person is ignorant of the scientific description of their sensations, he thinks that they could still be the same thing in similar way as the morning and evening star were the same thing, despite the way it looked in language. And then the other objection is about the words mean something else, so they can't be the same thing. The sensations seem to not have any location, but the brain process does. And then finally, the Cartesian objection, that isn't it conceivable, though, that they could be different things? And none of these push him off of his position. He tries to rebut those various objections. In the end, then, he says, look, I've taken on the best punch, as it were, from these dualists. I've taken their best arguments, and I've dismissed them with my own responses. And therefore, in the end, he says dualism is not as plausible or reasonable as physicalism is. And returns to his main claim. Sensations are just brain processes. Okay, so I told you there was one more author on this whole topic of philosophy of mind. And since we have about 20 minutes, I'm going to at least try to give you some brief details about it. I won't give the full analysis and breakdown that I would have with a little bit more time, but I'll at least, I think, be able to give you the essence of this last taste of philosophy of mind. Okay, guys? So let's quickly erase that. And take a few minutes then with the last part of class today to go over this man's ideas. And this is Alan Turing. Alan Turing is the father of modern computer science. This is actually a huge historical figure that's in a way like an unsung hero. I don't know if his name is as widely known as it probably should be, because this is basically the inventor of the digital computer. So how important is the computer, right? I mean, here we are, we're communicating through it. And all of us with these smartphones are basically walking around with little mini computers in our pocket all day. So we can't take for granted how much of a revolutionary change to modern life the computer has provided. And he's one of the main inventors of that. And he's often credited as the forefather of the computer. He lived from 1912 until 1954. And so he had actually a short life. There was a movie that was made about his life that actually the actor Benedict Cumberbatch won the Oscar for his portrayal. I don't know, have any of you guys heard of it? It was Oscar-winning, recent movie, The Imitation Game. I know we don't have a million people here, but just question, anybody seen it? It is called The Imitation Game, yeah. That's the name of the movie. Oh yeah, so you've seen it, then you know a little bit about this historic figure. In that movie, they didn't talk as much about his computer programming and computer science work. They talked more about the other aspect of his life, which is that he was a code breaker for the Allies, US and Britain, that were fighting against the Nazis during World War II, right? So not only did he help usher in the invention of the computer with all the amazing things that has done for us in the world, but also he's somewhat responsible for helping to defeat, fascism and Nazism in World War II. So he also gets credit for that. Thing about it, though, he kind of has a tragic end to his life. So you can see that he didn't live that long, just 42. One of the things that happened in his life is that he was a gay person, okay? And in that time period, it's hard to imagine in a way, but the laws that existed in Britain were such that if a person was outed as gay, it was considered to be like a sexual deviance that was criminally subject to prosecution. So his orientation was outed. He was put through a trial, and they ordered him by order of the court to take this cocktail of chemicals that's supposed to like kill off your sexual libido. So it's like chemical castration kind of, as legal punishment just for being gay. Anyway, he dies at 42 of cyanide poisoning, and it's officially ruled suicide. Some people maybe wonder if there's a different explanation, but that's the fact. He did die of cyanide poisoning at 42. Anyway, we're interested in one of his essays, basically, here. I just give you some of his background and biography. In 1950, he wrote a very important essay in the philosophy journal Mind, and it's called this, Computing, Machinery, and Intelligence. So his question that he wants to explore in this essay is a fundamentally interesting question, which is this. Could computers or machines, robots, could they ever think? Could they ever have consciousness like what we have? Okay, so me and you, we're conscious beings. Here we are, we're perceiving things. We're witnessing things, we're able to see, hear, taste, touch, feel, we can think. We are mental beings, we have a mental life. Question, could a machine like a computer ever be built which also has consciousness? Is that possible or is it not? And Alan Turing is interested in that question as the creator of the digital computer. He speaks with, I think, a considerable, kind of authoritative insight because he spent much of his life and time, dealing with the idea of computers. And it's interesting that he would even pose this question because think about it. In the 1950, when he wrote this paper, a computer, quote unquote, back then was like, it's like the size of a garage, and it would be very rudimentary with less processing and computing power and speed than like the pocket calculator that you have nowadays. But you got to start somewhere. And even back then, with his kind of visionary ability to see into the future, he knew or thought that computers are going to continue to advance as processing power and storage capacity and data speed increase. He believed that computers will actually achieve consciousness down the line in the future. This has been the subject of a lot of different kind of science fiction films that I'm sure you guys are all aware of. That's a genre of film that didn't exist hundreds of years ago before we really had such machines. But, if you've thought of like the movie Her or Ex Machina or, I don't know, Space Odyssey 2001, kind of a classic item in the genre, they often play with this idea, could there be conscious or thinking machines that actually have the ability to experience and feel like what we do? Now, so that's his question in the paper. Could a machine ever think? But he says in order for us to really grapple with this question in the right detail, we have to think of a test situation which would allow us to evaluate whether the machines have consciousness and whether they can think. And he says the way to do that is by means of what he calls the imitation game. That is therefore the namesake of the film that some of you guys have seen. Peachy's so cute. This kitty's crazy. She'll just lay like that, like she's the best cat ever. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Peachy. Okay. So yeah, imitation game. Let's do it. So here is the way the imitation game is played. Now there's one version of the game that involves like human beings playing the game as just like a party game. That version of the game, though, is just used to sort of show you the basic features of how the game is played. But the real version that we care about is when we substitute one of the human contestants for a computer or a robot. So here's the way it goes. You got a partition. This is like a wall. People can't see through the wall. On one side over here, you've got this individual. And let's call them, just label them C. On that side of the wall labeled C, that's an interrogator. They're going to ask questions. Now, the version of the game played with humans, let me just briefly describe it, but for your notes, the real version that is most important is what happens after I describe this, but I want to like build up to that. So on the other side, let's say we have two people. One is a woman, that's A. One is a man, that's B. Okay, now I know sometimes men have long hair, women have short hair, just, it's like the restroom, okay? I'm just using some symbols to designate the gender. Now, the imitation game when it's played with human subjects is like this. The interrogator's over here, and he gets to ask these two individuals questions of whatever kind he wants. He can ask any question that he wants, but the thing is, he has a set time period. So like, let's say he gets about 5 minutes with one of them, and then 5 minutes with the other one. All he knows is, I'm talking to subject A, and then I'm talking to subject B. Now, let's suppose that he knows one of them is a man, and one of them is a woman, but he's not told which one is which. And he has to just judge that based on the question and answers that he gets back from the questions. Now, what's a win for our interrogator? If when he's conducted the two interviews, he makes his decision, who was the man and who was the woman. So here's would be a win. If based on the answers he got, he said, I think A is the woman and B is the man, then he correctly identified their genders and he wins. But here's how the other two play the game. Now, A is a woman. So she's just answering questions as a woman naturally. B is a man. But let's say that what B is going to do is he's going to try to imitate the characteristic responses a woman would give to throw the interrogator off. So that's what makes it a game. So he's going to try to make it hard for C to tell the difference between who's really the man and who's the woman. Okay, so if the interrogator is asking a question to B, B wants to give a response that he thinks will induce him to falsely judge that that's the woman and the other person's the man. He doesn't know who's the real woman and who's the imitator. But suppose that, like a man is playing the role of B, trying to give off the impression that this is a woman answering questions. Suppose that C asks a question like, what is your favorite movie? Now, I don't want to lean too heavily on gender stereotypes about what kind of movies men and women like, but for the purposes of discussion, what could be a stereotypical type of film that maybe B would want to say to throw off this person, C, and give them the wrong idea that they're a woman instead of a man. So C asks B, hey B, what's your favorite film? So then what does B maybe say? Any thoughts? The Notebook, good, right? So yeah, basically just, well, okay, Andrea, Fast and Furious would throw it off because Fast and Furious is a very masculine, hyper-masculine type of film. And in that case, B would not be imitating the answer of a woman. So do you understand, Andrea? These other answers are kind of better. They want to seem like the woman to throw off the interrogator's correct judgment, okay? So I think we all on the same page, yeah. And by the way, women very well can and do like those action movies, and men sometimes like these emotional and other type of movies. We're just working off of these examples, okay? So now, question, how do you think the questions and answers are submitted and received back? In what medium? How do you think these questions are going to be sent, and how are the answers going to be sent back? In what form? Who thinks they know that? How shall the answers be returned back to the interrogator? Through text, very good. Through writing or text. Good, well, why is that important? How come we can't just hear their voice? I mean, I think you understand why. The reason it has to be through text is in order for it to be something that otherwise the voice would give it away, right? If he could just say, hey, B, let me hear your voice, and B's like, hey, yeah, it's me, I'm a woman, then he would know that that's a perhaps deeper voice, and that would give it away. So making sure that it's text-based ensures that he's only allowed to judge based on the content of the response and not the sound of the voice or whatever. Now, why is there a wall? That's perhaps even more obvious. The wall, it's clear why there's a wall, but will you tell me? We have to place a wall between the interrogator and the two interview subjects because, why? Why is that? The wall? Anybody? I think it is pretty easy to say. Come on, Peachy. She wants to play. Well, look, no takers, but here's the reason. The wall is there, obviously, because otherwise you could just simply see the person. Not doing the machine one yet. Hold on, Red Panda. We'll get there. Okay, good. So now the real imitation game. This is like a slow build-up. The real imitation game is when we actually remove one of the human subjects here and we replace them with a computer. All right. So yeah, now it's still the imitation game, but what do you think is the goal in this case? So C is the interrogator. He gets to interview the two individuals for like a set period of time, 5 minutes each. And in this real version of the imitation game, which is the one that Turing actually is interested in, What's the goal of the interrogator? Not to tell who's the man or who's the woman, but rather to figure what out based on the answers given. To find out which is the computer and which is a real human being, correct. Okay, so A is the imitator who's trying to imitate the human responses that a human would probably give, okay? So if you're the interrogator, what kind of questions do you think you would ask? Well, you don't know which one is which, but when you give the interview and you're getting answers back, you'd ask questions that might help you determine who's a real human and who isn't. So what kind of questions do you think you would ask if you were the position of the interrogator? Like what? Might ask something based on feelings good. Yeah, so you might say, tell me your deepest fear. What is one of your earliest memories? Have you been in love? With who? Why? How did it end? Can you tell me a time where you felt like really embarrassed? You know, so you'd probably ask questions like these that you feel like would only be possible to give a strong answer from a real human with real life experience as a human. Now, A is in imitating the responses of a human being. What's a win then for the interrogator? Once again, it's correct identification. So if he finishes the 2 interviews and he comes away saying, you know what, I can tell A is a computer and B is a human, then he passes he wins. He loses if he fails to correctly identify. So if he got it wrong and he said, I think A is a human and B is a computer, then he could not tell them apart. Now here's what Turing said. Turing said, when we get to a point in time where these machines are so convincing in the way that they portray a human-like conversation, when we reach a point where the interrogator misidentifies these cases at about 50% rate of failure, that will be the day when these are thinking machines that are actually conscious, that have consciousness. So Turing said, this is the test. It's called the imitation game in his paper, but if you go out and you look at like there's a lot of work that's being done on this in all kinds of AI labs across the whole world, and they oftentimes call it the Turing test today because it's been given his namesake. Now, of course, Turing himself didn't call it the Turing test. That would take a lot of ego, but he just calls it the imitation game. Or you could sometimes see it if you research this as referred to as the Turing test. He says machines are conscious when they cause an interrogator doing the Turing test to not be able to tell the difference about half the time. So it can't be just like one time, maybe someone was half asleep or drunk and they couldn't tell the difference. It has to be that like over a series of trials, you keep getting it half the time right. It's not that you're going to fail 100% of the time because it's basically like a coin flip. Like I can't tell the difference between a human subject and a computer interview subject. Now, in his judgment, in Turing's judgment, this is not just something that can happen, but it will happen. He predicted that by the year 2000, 50 years ahead of when he wrote this, that we would be deceived by the computer about 25% of the time. But he thought that it would just be a slow and steady march as computers continue to rapidly advance, that at some point in the next century, this century, we would have thinking computers that you just could not tell the difference between them and a human that you're interviewing. So that's Turing's position. I want to connect this back quickly to our larger topic. We're talking about physicalism and dualism, right? So what if Turing was correct? What if machines could think and have consciousness? What if we were able to build computers that actually possessed thought and consciousness? Would you say that would support physicalism or dualism if that was true? If machines could think? Would that be more supportive basically of physicalist or dualist thought? Anybody got a view on that? Correct, yes, good, Sierra. It would support physicalism more. Why do you think so? Or why does anybody think that that's the case? Why would thinking machines be evidence in favor of physicalism? You say it would support that, and I agree. But does anyone have an intuition about how they could expand on this point? Like, why is that what it seems to be? Because the machines were built to have a consciousness. Well, because it's matter. That's right. A machine, correct, Andrea, is indisputably a physical object. Like, nobody looks at their computer and is like, there's a soul in there. There's some kind of ghost in this machine. So if machines, which are known to be physical, just built out of chips, transistors, wires, circuits, if those things could actually start thinking and having thoughts and consciousness, then it might seem to many people to be a proof of the concept that consciousness can arise within a purely physical system. And that might make us start to think that our own consciousness is nothing other than the byproduct of a highly complex physical brain. Now, I guess I didn't have enough time to cover all the objections to Turing's view. And there's a lot of interesting objections. Maybe some of you are sitting there thinking about them even right now, just in your mind. Like, for example, one person that was a friend of Turing said, a lady that was his friend named Lady Lovelace, she said, trying to challenge his ideas, even though they were friends. She said, I don't know, I don't think so, Alan, because these machines, they're just going to do whatever they've been programmed to do, but that's not real original thought like what we have. We can do all kinds of new improvisational creative things, but a machine can only do what it's been programmed to do. So if it's a very sophisticated chatbot or whatever, then maybe it has the conditions of programming so that when you give a certain input, like a question, it triggers it to give a certain output, like a written response, but that there's no real feeling or thought going on inside. It's just doing what it was programmed to do. In reply to that, though, Turing says, well, the brain is no different. We don't much think about it, but the brain also is a system that can't think about or act on information until it acquires it from an external source. So like take this, for example, a baby born today, are they speaking English today? No, not on day one. They will down the line, but only after they take in all this information from their environment, from their parents, and from the community of people around them. So it's not like language just bubbles up from inside. It has to be inputted in a way from an external source. Even you, right? I mean, here you are, now you know about the Turing test. Maybe before this lecture, you couldn't have told anybody about the Turing test, but now you can go along and tell someone about it. You could tell a friend, hey, it's a weird idea, but think about Alan Turing's Turing test and explain it to them. But how did you learn about it? It's not like you created it. You got the information from a book, from a teacher, from this lecture, from me. So you can argue that we are also only able to think on and interpret and act on information that we acquire from an external source. We're just much faster and more powerful than a typical computer. Another objection was, that's not real consciousness. It's just behavior that imitates consciousness. It's just input-output conditions, but there's no real feeling happening inside. So if you ask the computer, what's your greatest fear? And it says, oh, I'm afraid of heights. I'm so scared. As a child, I got lost, in a high place, and that scared me for the rest of my life. You're like, wow, that's a very human-like response. But you could argue that though it seems human, there's no real intellectual or internal mental activity. It's just a response given based on a program. Well, to reply to that, Alan Turing says, but how do you know? Because you can't verify from the inside point of view that anybody has consciousness except for yourself. First-person access to the feelings and thoughts of someone, it's only that you have your own thoughts and consciousness that you can observe from within. So the judgment of another being having consciousness has to be behavioral. So in essence, he says, you have to be skeptical that anything has consciousness if you don't believe that a computer, which is talking and acting just like a human would, and you can't tell the difference, that somehow that's not consciousness. If you're waiting to be the computer, feeling yourself thinking, well, that's an impossible standard, and he thinks that's not really reasonable. I'll leave you with this. If you ever want to test out the most advanced current existing chatbot, so like there's an international competition every year called the Loebner Prize. And the award is given to the most sophisticated and advanced current chatbot that's getting closer to passing this Turing test. So far, the machines we've built, even the most advanced state, are not yet quite capable of passing a skilled interrogator with enough reliability to say that we think it's passed Turing's test. But we're getting much closer. And the best one out there is this. I'll put it in the chat. And if you ever want, you can look it up. There's apps and stuff that allow you to chat with this robot anywhere. It's Mitsuko. This is the winner of the Loebner Prize for the past several years. And she keeps getting more and more impressive in her conversational ability. In fact, when we've had more time in the class in past semesters, I've done the Turing test with the student group. And what I do is I have one friend that's a human, and I'm also on the phone with Mitsuko, and I moderate a conversation between the students asking questions and one interview subject, a human, and the other, Mitsuko. And many times, you'd be surprised to know that like whole classrooms have been quite divided in their opinions of which was the human and which was the computer, and in some cases, close to a majority of people got the wrong answer. It's almost spooky talking to Mitsuko sometimes because of the way that it's very powerful. And if you think about the difference in computer technology, even from like the 80s, think about like old video games or like old Nintendo versus today, and then you imagine fast forward another 50 years or 40 or 30 years with the rate of technological advancement, which seems to be in an exponential graph. I don't know if it's impossible for us to dream of the possibility of thinking machines, or at least machines that are very good at imitating consciousness later on in our own lives. So will they really be conscious or not? Will turning them off be an immoral act against a being with thoughts? That's something for you to judge and contemplate. It's a philosophical question. But the creator of the computer, you know his view, that yes, that would be consciousness and that it's waiting in store down the line. A lot of weird movies have been made where the machines become conscious and then want to overthrow humanity and enslave us, like in Terminator and other films. I don't know if that dystopian outcome is what we would expect. But there's all kinds of very weird and interesting think pieces, like robots writing articles. You ask a robot, like, hey, give me your thoughts on yourself. And they're starting to give weirder and weirder answers every year if you follow this in the news and the literature that comes out from these labs. Anyway, that's all I had to say on this today. So we've caught up most of the way through our class. We're just going to now have 2 more lecture periods. I'll distribute the study guide for the final exam during this week. And then that means you'll be ready to be prepared for the review session next week. Okay, guys, so don't forget your essays due next Tuesday. Anybody that wants any comments or help of any kind, you could always send me a draft. But if you do, like I was saying, try to get it to me not too late in the game. Before the weekend would be ideal. Okay, then, guys, have a great one. Another good meeting. I'm glad that you guys had a good break, and I hope everyone's staying healthy and safe. Take care, then, and see you on Thursday.